Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. Welcome to part 2 of my heavyweight contenders for 2018. Thank you for joining me, and I sincerely do mean that. And if you haven't already, please throw a jab to that like button, and if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. So part 1, I covered off about 10 or so contenders in no particular order. Then there were a few themes that did emerge in the comment section. The first one was, people did really enjoy this picture of David Price in his dad's suit. Slightly doctored, here's the original image, not much better really. Some weren't convinced that Hughie Fury does deserve contender status. And there were quite a few comments about Jerrell Miller, Jerrell Big Baby Miller. And he wasn't even in part 1. So I will get to him shortly. But I wanted to first get to a group of heavyweights who are at the contender level, kinda. But at the same time, they're also not. And that's for various reasons. And just getting back to criteria, if you want the full breakdown, that is in part 1. Okay, first cab off the rank, Amir Mansour. Not a guy that gets a lot of headlines in the division. He's had draws with Gerald Washington and more recently Sergey Kuzmin. And that clash actually, that was stopped in the 3rd round because of cuts. And that it was still in the feeling out stage, and it would have been good to see that one go to a result because either guy, they kind of needed that for their career. But Mansour, he's also fought Dominic Breazeale. He was actually dominating him, but then he had to retire after he sustained a nasty tongue injury and also a broken jaw. So the guy, he's not without pedigree. But the question is he a fully fledged contender? I would say yes, but there's a few things that weigh him down. He's a dangerous southpaw that really struggles to find opponents to get in the ring with. And given he's 45, yes, 45, that's a massive concern. Time is not on his side. And the fact that he's a handful in the ring, that's probably worked against him. He's one of these guys that, is a bit of a wildcat. He's a bit dangerous, maybe just a bit too dangerous. No one wants to be tripped up by that guy. And especially someone that probably doesn't put them into a much better position. Because even though that he holds a few minor titles, he's really struggled to find a place in the rankings consistently. And from the 4 sanctioning bodies' rankings, which I've checked out for this video, only the WBO has him in their top 15. And that's actually not an unusual situation for Mansour. And when he does come in, he's sort of on the fringes of the top 15. So for Mansour, it's got to be a big year for him, or he may fade into obscurity. Father Time is undefeated, and it's going to catch up with him. So he kind of needs to win big and win big now. But will he get the opportunity? I'm not so sure. Another guy that is kind of at the contender level, but not, is Sergey Kuzmin, who was in his first step-up fight against Mansour recently. Obviously, that ended prematurely to cuts, as I mentioned earlier. So it's in the books as a draw. So on that basis, I'll sneak him in as a freshly minted contender. And Kuzmin, he's an interesting guy. Very good amateur pedigree, including a win over Joe Joyce in 2013. And there's been a decent amount of buzz, at least, around him for a while. Currently, he's 11-0 with the Mansour draw as well on his record. He's 6'3", he does everything pretty well, and at 30, he should be entering or in his prime. And for me, one of the knocks on him, though, is his conditioning. He can be in better shape. And to get to the top of the mountain in the heavyweight division and stay there, I mean, getting there is hard enough, but you've got to be in better shape than Kuzmin is. I'd actually like to see him in the rematch with Mansour. And the winner, they would definitely be in line for bigger things. I mean, Kuzmin, he's got time on his side. Mansour does not. And the next two that are kind of half in and half out of my contender list, or the second part here, they're probably actually more out, but I'll mention them anyway. So Alexander Dimitrenko, he's been a fringe guy for a number of years, never quite been able to take that next step. Then in 2017, out of nowhere, he knocks out highly touted prospect Adrian Granat in a massive upset. We didn't see that one coming. And it kind of put him back in the map in the division. And maybe he's in line for another decent payday or two. But he's one of these guys that he's probably only one loss away from being somewhat irrelevant in the division. I mean, he almost had worked his way out, but then he had that win over Granat. And as they say, rooster today, feather duster tomorrow. Shannon Briggs, he's another guy I did want to mention. He's more out than in, and perhaps more of an honourable mention than anything. I mean, the guy is the king of self-promotion with the whole let's go champ thing. But it did take a hit last year with a PED-related case that saw him lose a shot at the WBA regular title, which was scheduled against Fringe for mid-June last year. So he was out for 6 months, and now he's looking to come back, and he's looking to chase down someone like Tyson Fury. I mean, he's a guy that can never be discounted completely because, you know, even at 45, he's in great shape. I mean, whether PEDs are responsible for some of that, I don't know, but in terms of his power, we know he's still got power, and that's one of the last things that often fades with a heavyweight. So he might only have a few good rounds in him, but at 45, he can't be counted out completely. So let's get into the guys, the contenders, where there kind of is no question that they are actually a contender. And let's start with Kubrat Pulev. He has almost become, and I was thinking about this the other day, the forgotten man of the heavyweight division just in a matter of months. He was scheduled to face Anthony Joshua as Joshua's IBF mandatory. He got injured a couple of weeks out from the fight, and that allowed the way for Carlos Takam to step in. I mean, since then, which has been the end of October, it's been so quiet from Pulev. What's he doing? What's been happening? No fight scheduled, no real update. I mean, I did see a recent comment attributed to him that he still wants to face Anthony Joshua. Given Pulev had the chance to face Joshua in 2016, he said no then. Then he gets injured 2 weeks out from their fight in 2017. Is the IBF going to offer up a shot again at their champ to the Bulgarian? Not so sure. I actually remember when the 2017 bout was arranged, and you'll probably remember this too, it was right after Klitschko retired. Pulev, he said he wanted a 3 to 4 month camp, so up to 4 months, so he could, as he put it then, properly prepare. I mean, that would have pushed it into this year, and it was never going to work for Joshua and his promoter Eddie Hearn. They had a stadium booked, and they'd been talking for months about October 28th as being the next ring date for Anthony Joshua, regardless of the opponent. And I get that Pulev wanted to have the ideal preparation, but a 4-month training camp way over the top. And for me at least, gave an indication Pulev only wants to jump in the ring if everything has gone to plan, to a T. It's been executed perfectly. The late pullout, you know, I've got to admit, I started thinking this way a little bit as well. It certainly had people saying he didn't want that work. And I understand why they were saying it. And it makes me wonder, is his confidence a bit shaky? We know he took on Vlad. He was quite confident before that fight. And in the end, he got steamrolled. He went in with a game plan that was the wrong game plan. But has that actually scarred him to the point now that he's not jumping in there unless everything is perfect? But he is a perennial contender. Has been for a number of years now. But he needs to embrace his opportunities in 2018. Or he'll continue to be on the outside looking in. So Jerrell Miller. This is the guy that, you know, a lot of people wanted to talk about in the first video comment section, and he wasn't even in the video. Fair to say he divides fans, and people are divided on actually how good is Jerrell Miller, or otherwise. And from the videos that I've done about Miller, it's clear he's got a group of hardcore believers and also a group of firm doubters, and there doesn't seem to be too much in between. And no doubt, a decent chunk of comments to this video are going to centre around his ability and also probably his weight. I'm in the camp where I do like what I see, but I've got to see more before I fully get on board the Jerrell Miller train. I did like that Marius Wok fight that he had, but you know, how shot was Wok? He didn't look like the guy he was a couple of years ago. And Miller, he's clearly overweight, but he's still effective. He's able to maintain his smothering style and throw a huge volume of punches compared to a lot of other heavyweights. And it might not always be pretty, and his punches might be a bit slappy at times. But in 2017, his style proved very effective against not only Marius Wok, but also Gerald Washington. And it must also be said, one of his most valuable weapons is actually outside the ring. It's his pre-fight trash talk banter, which is mostly on point and it gets in the heads of opponents. He did a real number on Gerald Washington in their final pre-fight press conference, and you could see Gerald Washington was visibly affected by it. His demeanour, he kind of looked like, and at the time I sort of said it, like he was beaten before he got in the ring. And the way things are shaping up, Miller is perhaps just one fight away from a title shot. So expect him to shape up against someone in the first 6 months of this year, against someone who's good, but not too good. I mean, Miller himself has said he'll be fighting Trevor Bryan in April. So Bryan, he is sort of fringe contender. He's more sort of at the end of a prospect stage. He hasn't had that true step-up fight yet, and it hasn't been confirmed. And expect Miller as well to be closer to 300 pounds again when he climbs back into the ring. When he slimmed down to 283 pounds for his last fight, he actually stated afterwards, and this is probably before he went on a cheeseburger binge, he felt that he was more effective when he was at the heavier weight. I mean, I kind of scratched my head at that sort of talk, but he seems locked in mentally in being in the high 290s. And Miller, he's also claimed recently, and this is just round out the Jerrell Miller section here, that he is only one fight away from a title. He says that Eddie Hearn, or he claims that Eddie Hearn, who he has a co-promotional arrangement with, has told him he will be getting a shot at Anthony Joshua after his next fight. I mean, I kind of look at where things are shaping up right now, and I'm not so sure that happens. But the fact that he is in bed with Hearn, he's at least in the queue. Maybe second or third cab off the rank, but he's in the queue nonetheless. I guess if the Trevor Bryan fight doesn't pan out for Miller, a guy who might actually be a decent opponent, who's my next contender, is Johann Duhaupas. And some of you might be wondering why, but since getting starched by Alexander Povetkin in late 2016 after a day's notice, the Frenchman has set about staying busy with a few low-level bouts, and that's actually been good enough to see him climb alarmingly high in the WBC rankings. And he's also ranked in the IBF and WBA respectively. And while I don't expect Duhaupas to make a lot of noise in the division this year, he's surprisingly well placed, and so on that basis he makes the cut. I can see a number of guys targeting him just because he's got rankings in 3 of the 4 at the moment. Dominic Breazeale, the big 6'7" American. He had one of the better 2017s of the current crop of contenders. Like Miller, he actually fought a couple of decent guys. He was bouncing back from a 2016 loss to Anthony Joshua when he took down the highly touted and ranked prospect Izu Agono in February 2017. Later in the year, he also defeated two-time titleist Eric Molina. So he's now ranked 2nd in both the WBC and WBO, as well as 7th in the WBA. So he is in a prime position for a title shot. And I feel most likely, and I've said this in a previous video, most likely in the WBC. So my thinking on this is that, say for example, Joseph Parker pulls off the upset against Anthony Joshua in March. There will be an immediate rematch. So that kind of rules out a unification, at least in the short term, with the WBC belt holder. But say Joshua beats Parker and Deontay Wilder in March also beats Luis Ortiz. I don't think a mega fight, a unification between the two, Wilder and Joshua, I don't think it happens immediately. More likely it would be the back end of 2018 as they haggle over things like money and where it happens, and just generally they'll want to build the fight, let it marinate, make it bigger. So I could see that happening later, but in the intervening period, both would probably have a fight. And that could be the shot for Dominic Breazeale. Given Breazeale has built himself back up, he'd be among the better voluntaries that Wilder could take. Or Ortiz for that matter, if he was to beat Wilder in March. I mean, there's a lot of ifs, buts and maybes, but it is a possible scenario. A Wilder-Breazeale clash also makes a lot of sense on the promotional side of things as well, given there was some beef that was generated after Breazeale featured on Wilder's undercard in February 2017. And after that night, and the details are a little bit sketchy on this, but there was some sort of fracas or altercation between Wilder's entourage and Breazeale himself in a hotel lobby after the event had ended. And Breazeale, he actually launched legal action in response to the situation. So I bet a potential title shot, that would help it go away. Probably best I don't speculate too much more on what would happen on that front. But, I mean, Breazeale, he shapes as a ready and willing contender. And don't forget, he is with Al Heyman. That would be an in-house fight. It would be much easier to make. And at the end of the day, if Al Heyman wants to match Deontay Wilder with Dominic Breazeale, he's probably going to have a lot of sway with Wilder. He's the one advising him on his career. And that's a situation where, even though Wilder says he doesn't want to have Anthony Joshua's leftovers because Joshua beat Dominic Breazeale, I'm sure Al Heyman would be able to sway him and get it over the line. I mean, remember, Deontay Wilder was also saying he didn't want any part of Berman Stavern. He wanted to get around it, didn't want to fight him. In the end, he did fight him. So, you know, things can change and situations can change. We'll have to see on this one. Carlos Takam, well, he's next in the list. And he's just one of a few guys who makes the cut despite coming off a loss. And in his case, it was a 10th round stoppage at the hands of Anthony Joshua. It was definitely one of those fights where Joshua, he had an edge, a handy edge at that, and he was winning the rounds, but it wasn't completely one-sided. It was still relatively competitive for decent stretches of the fight. And Takam, he was getting some good work away at times. I mean, certainly it wasn't any disgrace by any stretch, especially considering he was drafted in at 12 days' notice. Guys like this, who give a good account of themselves, they're only ever 1 or 2 fights away at this level. So he could very well be positioned well by the end of this year. It doesn't take much for another run at a title when you've already reached the top, but you put in a great effort. Promoters, they know that guys like this, they gain the respect from the fans and people want to see them again. But at the same time, they're also highly beatable. But I would say age, it's starting to become a little bit of a factor with Takam. Starting to get up there. I think he's 37 now. But I guess actually that can sometimes be in a fighter's favour when the champ wants a challenge, but maybe not the prime version of that fighter. They know they're slightly past their best, so they jump in the ring. Have to see. I do like Takam. He always gives his all when he's in the ring. So Agit Kabayel, he is next. He stamped his mark on the division in 2017. He took down the gatekeeper come Fringe contender Derek Chisora, who's not on my list. And before then, Kabayel, he was regarded as a guy, and this is, you know, for a couple of years, a very talented prospect who was in need of a step-up fight. And he got exactly that against Chisora, and he looked relatively impressive in getting the win. He showed, you know, he's got a pretty decent back foot game, and his general movement and ring craft pretty sound. So Kabayel, he is probably slightly on the outside looking in terms of a title shot, but another good win. It's going to put him in the conversation. This next one, this is probably going to get up the nose of a few people, but Charles Martin, the man who walks this earth like a god, he's actually sneakily well positioned in the WBC rankings, and he's also ranked by the IBF. And while it's arguable, I mean, I believe this at least, that, you know, it's arguable that the public has yet to forgive him for his performance, his insipid lay-down misere against Anthony Joshua. Let's face it, there's always going to be room in the division for a big, talented southpaw. Let's not get it twisted. Martin, he's got some good skills. So the heart, it may be a bit questionable, might be a bit of an issue from big fights, but actually, you know, he's maneuvered himself into a good position where with one good win over a proper name, he could well be in the conversation for another title shot. It could really happen that quickly. But he would have to get there with a good win. Who that's against, I'm not so sure. But I'm sure that there's a number of guys out there who'll be looking at his ranking and thinking, actually, I think I could take this guy down. So we'll have to see where he goes. He's got a stay busy fight coming up. But yeah, can he walk this earth like a god again? Not so sure. But he can probably, by the end of this year, be in a pretty good spot if he puts in the work. The final 2 guys on this list, and I'm going to loosely pair them together because they are facing each other in March. None other than Dillian Whyte and Lucas Browne. I'll start with Browne. His future prospects, they hinge on a good result. I really believe that. So when he's instantly back in the frame for an even bigger fight, But lose, I think his days of chasing titles, they'll be pretty limited. He is actually 38 after all. And if he loses, I mean, it's going to be a hard road back. And if we turn to White, well, in terms of him, if he wins, well, he's in a great spot. He's already #1 ranked in the WBC. So he could be confirmed the mandatory at some point. Obviously, the win here, he needs to get through that. But that would solidify his credentials to be called the mandatory. So just note, I mean, a number of people have been saying that he's the mandatory challenger. He's not at the moment. That's not how it works. So if you're #1, it's not automatic. He's got to wait for the WBC to actually order the fight against the champion, to mandate the fight. That hasn't happened yet. But a win over Lucas Browne, I could very well see that happening. I mean, some people would like to see maybe a final eliminator against Dominic Breazeale. But you could argue if he got through Derek Chisora, then Robert Helenius and Lucas Browne, that actually he's probably done enough for a shot. But, I could see a Dominic Breazeale and Dillian Whyte fight being quite entertaining, so I wouldn't mind that. But if he beats Lucas Browne, he probably has done enough to get that mandatory slot. So it's all there for White. All he needs to do, he's just got to keep winning. So if he wins, then, the WBC mandatory position, it'll be there for the taking potentially. And the other thing is, if he keeps winning, it could end up setting up a grudge match between Anthony Joshua and himself. I'm sure Eddie Hearn would love to do that. I mean, don't discount a possibility that if White beats Browne, that all of a sudden the calls for a Joshua-White rematch start to build up again. And we were always hearing from Eddie Hearn that Anthony Joshua, he wants another Dillian Whyte fight. So White, he's rebuilt himself up in people's minds. If he has a really good performance against Lucas Browne in March, and the Wilder fight isn't ordered or doesn't look like it'll be happening anytime soon, well, don't be surprised if Anthony Joshua says, yep, I'm going to take a voluntary and it's going to be Dillian Whyte. I can see that happening. And the bonus to that is Eddie Hearn gets to keep the money in-house as well. But some of that's dependent. White's got to win and Joshua's got to win too. So, it's not all set in stone. We'll have to see. And Joseph Parker, very live underdog in that Anthony Joshua fight. But a little bit off topic. But yeah, Lucas Browne, his career really hinges on a good performance. He's been out of the mix for basically 18 months because of the PED-related stuff. 2017 when he started to come back, just the one fight against Matthew Greer. He didn't really progress in terms of, his record, his resume, but he managed to get ranked in a couple of the sanctioning bodies, and he needed that, and now we're set up for a tasty fight in March with Dillian Whyte. So I'm starting to ramble a little bit, so I'll call it quits there. But what do you make of it all? So Kubrat Pulev, is he going to make some noise this year? I don't know. Is the IBF going to give him another shot at Anthony Joshua? I don't know about that. I mean, Jerrell Miller, I'm sure he's going to generate a lot of comments. Dillian Whyte, Lucas Browne. I mean, there's a lot of top guys here that literally, you could see a lot of scenarios where they are only one fight away from that title shot. Because I think some of the unification stuff, that'll clear up pretty quickly. And the guys, or whoever has the belts at that point, is going to need some credible opponents. So the guys in this part two, a lot of them, very well positioned. Even someone like Charles Martin. That wouldn't be a fight that most of us would like to see. But if he builds himself back up this year, could well happen. Who knows? Drop a comment, hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.